to gender equality. Thank you. Structural barriers to gender equality persist in many places around the globe, especially to the global south. They are deepening. Austerity is one of those barriers. And institutions like the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF and the World Bank actually is really involved in promoting austerity through loans, conditions, and policy advice to our countries. This policy cuts healthcare, policy cuts in healthcare, in education, and social protection budgets, shift care work back onto household. Women and marginalized groups are the people who pay the most and high price. I have to say that, for example, 85% of the world population are experiencing now austerity-driven fiscal consolidations. In MENA, Latin America, and Africa, austerity worsens inequality, especially for women in informal works, unpaid care, rules, etc. Cuts to health, طبعا services, increases maternal mortality, yes. Cuts to education, lower girls' enrollment, social protection, rollbacks forces women to absorb the shock. But this is not inevitable. We, as feminists, groups and feminist movements are proposing alternatives like care-centered economies, debt cancellation, gender-responsive budgets, equitable global economic governance. So I'm happy that this session is bringing different feminist and aligned perspective from researchers, academia, civil society actors, and activists, along with us as MENA Fem movement and the Global End Austerity Campaign. We also, in partnership with Latin Dad in this session, Akina Mama, and our members and close sister organization, Seula from Egypt. And I have, I'm happy that we are going to share this discussion together and come out with our alternatives against austerity. I start with Nada. And in Egypt, shedding the light on the austerity impact on women. Nada, you have around 7 minutes. The floor is yours.
شكرا يا شيرين. اسمحوا لي اتكلم بالعربي. انا كنت عامله حسابي على 15 دقيقه بس حاضر. طيب، شكرا جزيلا ليكم ولكل الحضور. انا اسمي ندى نشأت من مؤسسه قضايا المراه المصريه، والمؤسسه عضوه في منافم في الشبكه. انا هبدا بفكره انه ليه CSW السنه دي، او احنا موجودين ايه، وده علاقته ايه باللي بيحصل على مستوى الصندوق او على مستوى البنك الدولي. بكين الحقيقه من 30 سنه لما بدات اتكلمت على 12 محور رئيسي لدعم حقوق النساء. منها وكان الكلام على انه المرأة والاقتصاد، تأثير الاقتصاد على النساء في او دور النساء داخل الاقتصاد، وازاي انه التنمية الشاملة كمان ما ينفعش تحصل من غير النساء في المناقشة. يعني المرأة والفقر، الآليات المؤسسية وازاي ندعم النساء في مناصب صنع القرار، المرأة والبيئة، الصحة، التعليم، التدريب. كل هذه المحاور 12 محور من محاور بكين. الحقيقة المفترض ان البنك او الصندوق، هما الاثنين طبعا جهتين يعني سيسترز او اختين، ولكن هما المفروض جهتين مستقلين، بيدعوا ان هم بيشتغلوا علشان يحصل فعلا دعم للشعوب بشكل عام. وبقى في دلوقتي يعني مؤخرا محاولة إدخال ألفاظ جندرية أو لخطاب جندري داخل الخطاب بتاع البنك والصندوق. ولكن الحقيقة إنه كأننا قدام جهتين، يعني بكين الآليات الدولية الخاصة بحقوق النساء ده جزء، والصندوق والبنك بيشتغلوا بجزء تاني تماما، وبيتعارضوا كتير جدا، بيتعارضوا كتير جدا عكس بعض. لدرجة إن إحنا لما نيجي نتكلم على بكين مثلا، لما بنقول المرأة والفقر، وإنه أحد المحاور الرئيسية لبكين هي إنه إزاي لابد على الدول، ولابد على الدول الأعضاء طبعا، ولابد على كل الهيئات الدولية إن هي بتحارب الفقر، تحط برامج لمحاربة الفقر، والفقر في النساء تحديدا، لأن أكثر الفقراء من النساء، والأكثر تعرضا للتمييز اللي بيحصل من الفقر والعنف اللي بيحصل من النساء من الفقر هم النساء. وبعدين نبص نلاقي برنامج البنك الدولي أو إن برنامج
the
الصندوق
World
أزمة في
Bank program.
الانفاق، وخاصة إنه الصندوق بيشتغل على شورت تيرم، أو اللي إحنا بنسميه محدد المدة، مدة قريبة يعني. هو مش حاطط في اعتباره موضوع الفقر، بل بالعكس، الروشتة اللي دايما الصندوق بيقولها هي روشتة موحدة لكل الدول، انه يلا بينا نصلح الاقتصاد. فاحنا هنصلح الاقتصاد بان نرفع الدعم، ونعمل كات او بنخفض الانفاق الحكومي. والدعم طبعا بيدخل فيه دعم برفع الدعم عن المواد، وعن الآليات الحماية الاجتماعية، وعن كل ده، بالإضافة لتعويم العملة. دي روشتة محفوظة لكل الدول، أيا كان السياق، أيا كان الوضع الاقتصادي للدولة دي ما قبل القرض، ايا كان الوضع الاجتماعي للناس في هذه الدولة، هي روشتة محفوظة للجميع. طب ما هي الروشتة دي لما بتيجي من غير ما تعمل حسابها على وضع اقتصادي وسياسي واجتماعي معين في دولة ما، اللي بيحصل انه الفقراء بيزدادوا فقرا، وان النساء بالتبعية باعتبارهم اكثر الفقراء هم بيزدادوا فقرا باشكال وابعاد مختلفة. الصندوق ما بيحطش تقاطعية الفقر والعنف والأعراق والجندر أو الأدوار الجندرية وهو بيحط برامجه، أو هو بيقول شروطه. ومهما حصل من تداول، يعني على حد علمي، ويعني حضراتكم طبعا تقدروا تضيفوا على النقطة دي، مهما حصل من مشاورات، مهما حصل من نقاشات، حتى الاتجاه اللي الصندوق بيستخدمه او البنك الدولي بيستخدمه هو اتجاه نيو ليبرالي. فهو مش شايف النساء بتقاطعياته باشكالها، بتاثيرات مثلا بتأثيرات إن رفع الدعم، مش بيشوفه. هو شايف ان هو سوري مش قادرين تدفعوا، يعني تو باد، حاجة وحشة جدا، تجربوا تدوروا على شغل. طيب لو خدنا بكين في الموضوع، ما هو بكين بتقول الدول محتاجة ان هي تحط النساء داخل معايير الاقتصادية، محتاجة تبقى النساء جزء من هذا النقاش. بكين نفسها بتقول انه النساء محتاجة تتحط على كآليات مؤسسية، محتاجين آليات مؤسسية حقيقية تبقى بتدعم النساء في مناصب صنع القرار. فيجي البنك او يجي الصندوق ويحط ويعملوا كوميتي، يعملوا لجنه خاصه بالجندر، او ان هما بيحطوا في المجلس مثلا سواء الرئيسه او غيرهم او غيرهم بيبقى فيه نساء. بس من هم النساء؟ يعني هي دي كمان نقطه تانية. كويس انه يبقى فيه نساء، او التمثيل العددي ده بيبقى مهم. مش بنقول ان كل النساء بنفس الافكار، او كل النساء ملايكه، او كل الناس ممكن، او كل النساء ممكن تبقى بتاخد قرارات كويسه. مش بنقول ده، بس بنقول كمان انه على قد ما مهم انه النساء تبقى موجوده، بس كمان الدايفرستي او التنوع في النساء محتاج انه يتسمع. ما يبقاش كل النساء اللي موجودين كآلية مؤسسية بقى، لو هنربط ما بين بكين الآليات المؤسسية ودعم النساء في مناصب صنع القرار، كلهم جايين من باك جراوند معينة، كلهم جايين من خلفية واحدة. وحقيقي في أزمة في ال الفهم لما هي أبعاد الفقر. أو لما نيجي نقول النساء والاقتصاد، النساء والاقتصاد مش معناها إن النساء موجودين فقط أنا هطلع دراسة أو هنقعد نتكلم، ولكن إيه اللي حاصل على الأرض. إزاي النهاردة النساء في دول زي كينيا، زي المغرب، زي مصر، بالبرامج بتاعة الإقراض بتتأثر إزاي. بس كمان حتى لما نيجي نبص على برامج البنك الدولي، أسف، برنامج البنك، لما نيجي نقول إن البنك بيدي تكافل وكرامة، اللي هو موجود كمان في المغرب أعتقد باسم آخر، لو ممكن تصحي لي يا شيرين، وفي حاجات شبيهة ليه في كينيا. ويبقى نفس الروشتة برضه، يعني هي $20 كل الستات، سواء لأسرة سواء لفرد، هي $20 اللي هتبقى بتتصرف بنفس القدر من الشروط. طب هل حصل في أي مرحلة إن كان في بحث حقيقي عن إيه هي الأبعاد أو إيه هي الاختلافات ما بين هذه السياقات؟ لا، ما كانش فيه. فهي دايما الروشتة بتبقى واحدة للأسف الشديد، من البنك أو الصندوق، واللي أحيانا زي ما بشرح هنا بتتعارض أصلا مع اتفاقيات زي السداو أو زي منهاج عمل بكين. فإنه من ناحية الدولة ملتزمة بالقضاء على الفقر والقضاء على الفقر ضد النساء تحديدا، من الناحية التانية يروح طالع لي البنك الدولي سوري صندوق النقد ومشروطياته المختلفة. المشروطية في حد ذاتها أصلا موضوع نقاش كبير وإزاي بيأثر على النساء، ويروح حاطط المشروطية دي، فالدولة تبقى قدام أوكي سوري إحنا مضطرين نمشي وفقا لشروط البنك، فنشيل بقى الدعم عن الصحة، الدعم عن التعليم، وكل هذه الأشياء. لو خدت مصر كمثال في الحتة دي، طب ده بيأثر ازاي؟ يعني هذه المشروطية مع فكرة الالتزام المصري مثلا بإن احنا يبقى عندنا ان يبقى في بنحاول نموف فورورد، او بنحاول ان احنا ندعم النساء في المناصب المختلفة، او بنشيل الفقر او البيئة او غيرها. هدي مثال على فكرة ال- التعيين. من احد الحاجات اللي مصر كانت دايما بتبقى فخورة بيها، وحتى كنسويات كنا بنقول من الاشياء الجيدة عندنا ان البابليك سيكتور او القطاع الرسمي هو الملجأ الرئيسي لأنه ستات كتيرة تشتغل. وجزء منها كمان إنه في الوقت اللي كانت دول الشمال العالمي بتتخانق على فكرة المساواة في الأجر، القطاع الرسمي عندنا كان هو بالدرجة، فأيا كان اللي موجود ده راجل أو ست، هي الدرجة ده المرتب بتاع هذه الدرجة بغض النظر. وكنا دايما بنتناقش في إنه مش هي دي الأزمة، يعني مش أزمتنا كانت المساواة في الأجور أيامها. دلوقتي بقى الوضع مختلف. ليه؟ لأن البنك قرر، الصندوق أسف، قرر في مشروطيته اقطع الإنفاق، فاقطع البابليك سيكتور أو القطاع الرسمي، قلل من الناس اللي موجودين. طب لما بنيجي نقلل، مين أكتر ناس بتشتغل فيه؟ هي النساء. طب هل النساء اللي أنت قللتهم، هل أنت أعددتهم لأن هم يبقوا موجودين مثلا في القطاع الخاص؟ لا، ده مش حقيقي. طب هل القطاع أصلا بيحط في اعتباره احتياجات النساء المختلفة، وفكرة إنه محتاجين أنواع مختلفة من الدعم زي الدعم الرعائي، دعم الأمومة، دعم الحضانات؟ الحقيقة لا، مفيش رقابة قانونية قوية على الموضوع. بل بالعكس، إن قانون العمل عقوباته هينة جدا على القطاع الخاص لدرجة إنه مبقاش بيفرق معاهم. يعني في ممكن يبقى مديرين يقول لك ما هي ايه غرامة 50 جنيه مثلا، 100 جنيه غرامة مش مهم هدفعها، ومش هعمل القانون، مش هنفذ هذا القانون. سواء لما نيجي نتكلم على عدد الحضانات مثلا، او على عدد النساء العاملات، سوري الاجازات الوضع، او كل الحاجات اللي ما بتفرقش معاهم. بس احنا لما نيجي نبص على القطاع الرسمي، فكرة انه ما بقاش فيه العقود الدايمة، ما بقتش موجودة. فاحنا رحنا راجعين، الحقيقة ان احنا رجعنا خطوة لورا في انه اتضربت العقود الرسمية، فما بقاش فيه عقود رسمية، ان ما بقاش فيه الايكونوميك ستابيليتي، او اللي احنا بنسميها بالعربي ايكونوميك ستابيليتي، انا اسفة نسيت الستابيليتي الاقتصادية يعني. لكن من الناحية التانية كمان شالوا من النساء السبل اللي ممكن تخليها ترجع لقوة العمل، وهي عارفة انها محمية بشكل او باخر. انه تاني الصندوق، القرض بتاع الصندوق قرر انه لا، اشيله. طيب الستات دي شلناها من الستات دي شلناها من الاماكن اللي هي بتشتغل فيها. اوكي، هتاخد معاشات، هتاخد ايا كان بقى اللي هتاخده من الدولة في الحالة دي، او هتستمر على فلوس اللي هي لو ورثة يعني حاجة هتاخد او اللي محتفظة بيها او اللي محوشاها. فنتفاجئ من الناحية التانية انه لا والله احنا كمان هنرفع الدعم. فانتي ولادك مضطرين، الاطفال دلوقتي بقى احنا هندخلهم مدارس فهيدفعوا مبالغ. لا زال المبلغ لو اتحول لدولار رمزي او مش كبير، بس لما نيجي نفكر فيها انه لا، هي ما بتتحسبش وفقا للدولار، هي بتتحسب وفقا لمعدل الدخل بتاع الناس داخل هذه البلد. فلو هاخد مثال مثلا على عاملات سمنوت، ده مصنع من مصانع مصر موجود في المحلة. أم، النهارده هما بيتكلموا على around 3500 جنيه مصري أم، مرتب. قبلها لما وكانوا عاملين اضراب من فتره علشان كانوا عايزين يوصلوا للحد الادنى للاجور اللي هو 6000 جنيه، ولسه ما وصلوش. انا اللي مش هترجم ال 3500 دول لدولار، انا هترجم ال 3500 الحقيقه لعدد سندوتشات الفول اللي بتتباع في الشارع. من 10 سنين كان مرتبهم اللي هو 1500 يجيب حوالي 500 900 وشويه ساندوتش. النهارده 3500 هيجيبوا 500 ساندوتش. ده بمعدل بقى مش دولاري، مش ده معدل الأكل الطبيعي بتاع الناس. المعدلات دي نزلت. ففوق ده كله يعني القيمة بتاعة الفلوس قلت، بس كمان مطالب منهم انه هيدفعوا بدل المستشفى، بدل ما كانت جنيه اصبحت 10 جنيه. هل هي نفس الخدمات؟ للاسف هي نفس الخدمات. يعني قليلين، مستشفيات قليلة هي اللي بدأت فعلا يبقى فيها تطوير في خدماتها. باقي المستشفيات على مستوى الجمهورية للأسف بنفس نفس المستوى الخدمات اللي الدكاترة كمان بيعافروا. زادت عليهم من جنيه إلى 10 جنيه الرسوم دي بتاعت تذكرة الدخول. زائد إن المدارس زادت، بدل ما كانت أعتقد دلوقتي وصلنا لإيه 500 جنيه، مش متأكدة من الرقم الحقيقة. بس بدل ما كانت في مرحلة أيامي أنا كان ممكن كانت ب 50 جنيه رسوم الدخول للمدرسة، النهاردة إحنا بنتكلم في 10 أضعاف. فهو الحقيقة إنه كل هذه التفاصيل جاية من الدول محتاجة تلتزم، يعني بتتحط على محك، محتاجة تلتزم باتفاقيات دولية والتزامات دولية معينة تتكلم على أن النساء ليها الدور وليها حماية ولها الحق في الحماية. ويجي الصندوق من الناحية التانية أو يجي البنك من الناحية التانية ويقول سوري إحنا مش هنعمل ده. ولما نيجي ندعم، يعني البنك لما بيجي يدعم بيدي مثلا معاشات تكافل وكرامة في المصري حوالي 600 جنيه، اللي هم 12 دولار. احنا ما جبناش ال 20 بالمناسبة، هم 12 دولار شهريا. طب 600 جنيه دول علشان يدخلوا المدرسة، ولا علشان يتعالجوا، ولا علشان ياكلوا، ولا علشان يعملوا ايه؟ ده الحقيقة في عوار وفي عدم ربط ما بين ما هي الالتزامات والاستحقاقات الدستورية محليا أو الالتزامات الدولية، وما بين إنه في حد شخص كبير أو في كائن أكبر بكتير جدا هو بيتحكم بشكل استعماري جدا في إنه حلو موضوع الحقوق ده نبقى نتكلم فيه بعدين، أنت هتدفع. فكمان لو هنيجي نتكلم على هذه النقاط، الحقيقة إن التفكير النيوليبرالي اللي بيسيطر على الصندوق وبيسيطر على البنك هو بياخدنا بعيدا جدا عن أي استحقاقات دولية في يوم من الأيام وصلنا لها. وبل بالعكس هو بيساهم أكتر في تراجع حقوق النساء على المستوى المحلي، وخاصة النساء المهمشات أو المتعرضات والأكثر فقرا وتهميشا. أنا آسفة لو طولت، مستعدة لأكس. شكرا.
شكرا جدا يا ندى. هو في الحقيقة احنا كنا 20 دولار تقريبا لغاية السنة اللي فاتت لو بنتكلم على تكافل وكرامة، ولكن بسبب الانفليشن بقينا 12 دولار ولسه. أنا بتكلم على مصر تحديدا يعني. وزي ما قالت الزميلة ندى، مصر والمغرب وتونس أيضا كان عندها بروجرام بنفس الوتيرة. كينيا ومدن أخرى في وبلاد أخرى في أفريقيا. وهنستمع أيضا لتجارب من لاتين أمريكا. اللي أكيد هنلاقي حاجات شبيهة، ولكن لازم نحط إيدينا على أمر مهم جدا. السبب في سياسات التقشف هي المديونية الشديدة اللي بلادنا وقع فيها. المديونية الشديدة بسبب تاريخ طويل من الاستعمارية، وتاريخ التاريخ طويل من الاستعمارية وال والمشاريع الاستخراجية التي انتهكت موارد و... و... تحت مسميات التنمية، واللي خلتنا في وضع يعني اقتراض مستدام، ليس بمعنى الاستدامة هنا ولكن بمعنى أبدي. لا ينتهي، دايرة إقراض ودايرة ديون لا تنتهي، تولد عنها هذه السياسات التقشفية الظالمة. صحيح، أنا لازم أقول، ومن خلال عملي على مدار السنين الماضية، ال- ال- البرامج أو الخاصة أو السياسات الخاصة بالجندر تحديدا داخل البنك والصندوق تطورت بشكل كبير، نعم، ولكن للأسف الكور لم ينتهي، وهو المديونية الشديدة اللي بلادنا موجودة فيها، واللي خلتنا يعني لما يبقى مصر ولا الأردن مثلا ولا لبنان اللي اعلنت افلاسها، ولا ما قدرتش تدفع في في الاوائل 2020 او 21، ده معناه ان هذه البرامج لم تنجح. لما يبقى عندي 10 و12 و13 لغايه 50 سنه صندوق جوه بلادنا، معنى ذلك ان البرامج لم تنجح، معنى ذلك انه يجب ان يتم العمل بشكل يعني مختلف، ويجب ان نضع ال well being او الرفاه الاجتماعي في نصب اعيننا قبل الارباح. هنا انا allow me to shift to English in this, because we are speaking about the
نظرا لأننا
the
نتحدث
circle
الآن
of debt and austerity that we're living under. And in 2020 we came together as civil society and activists from the global movement to discuss together the impact of austerity during the time of COVID. And from this, we came out with the End Austerity Global Campaign. Isabel Ortiz, I was honored to work side by side with Isabel Ortiz and other colleagues on formalizing this campaign to be launched 3 years ago. And here we are now. Isabel, I want to thanks a lot for being with us today. And I want to hear from you your perspective around austerity and based on your research and work, and also what is the role of um, the how can I say, if I may say, it's not only the policies, but also the policies critique, but also the global actions and accountability that we can take forward against austerity. Isabel, the floor is
Thank you
yours.
very much, Shirin. It is great to be here with all of you. And I feel very, very proud after years of effort to be having seminars like this one at CSW. So I'm supposed to present the global scene and the global, an image is always better than 1,000 words. So if you allow me, I'm going to share screen, and then can you see now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So what you have here in red are the countries that actually that are experiencing austerity cuts. And as you can see, the whole world is on fire. Virtually all countries of the world are having austerity budget cuts. And this is based on IMF fiscal projections. It does not need to be that this will be like that in the future, but this is how they see it. And then we did something more. We read hundreds of reports to understand what policies was the IMF discussing with the ministries of finance. And this is not just conditionality, as in the case of Egypt. This is actually policy debates that they're having in the country reports with the ministries of finance, as they are very intertwined. They really think alike. And this is what we found. And as Nada and Shirin were saying, this is really a blueprint. And this is happening in the majority of countries of the world. We read reports for 185 countries, and these are the policies that they are being advised to ministries of finance. And we're going to present them now. And as you are going to see, they mostly affect women, affect negatively women. So this is really detrimental to women, and we must do something about it, obviously. The first most common measure, austerity measure, is targeting social protection. And this is interesting because normally it's called improving social protection, but not at all. What they do, maternity, and then you cut them all, and then they leave a very small safety net for the poor, which is completely insufficient to address all the needs, social protection needs of the population. And then women are the most affected, as Nada was explaining, because then they have to take more care at home, more unpaid care services to protect the family, that they stop having some social protection support. The second most common measure is cuts or caps to the public sector wage bill, and that means the number and the salaries of civil servants. And as Nada was saying, civil servants, the civil service is normally the largest employer of women. So they are mostly affected by that, but they are also affected because generally, you look at the public sector, the largest amount of civil servants are teachers, health workers, and local civil servants at the local level, and providing very important services to the population, like education, health, or local local services. So again, it affects women disproportionately. The third most common measure are eliminating subsidies, and they could be energy subsidies, but also, which of course affect transport and other very important public services, but also food subsidies and agricultural subsidies, which of course generally will raise the prices of food and other services. Then very often what we find is privatization or commercialization of public services. By this will be energy, but also public transport, health, water supply, and other public services. Then pension reforms is another very common measure in a large majority, in a large number of countries. And pension reforms generally will be cutting benefits. So we are talking again about old age poverty, because the reforms are really cutting benefits and not looking as much as improving the sustainability of the system. Then labor flexibilization reforms with bad reforms to do at a time where jobs are at risk. And then an interesting reform is actually waiving the social security contributions of employers as a way to provide some fiscal incentives for enterprises. However, this will be at the cost of workers, which will not have, social security contributions are part of workers' compensation, and they must be returned immediately to workers. It cannot be just a cut, Then cuts to health and other public services. And on the revenue side, it's interesting because it is to impose, to suggest and increasing consumption taxes or VAT, which are very regressive because they're paid the same by the wealthy and by the poor. PPPs, public-private partnerships, and fees for public services. And all these reforms are actually have negative social impacts, and they're increasing social conflict. And what you have here is the number of protests that they're happening since 2006 on issues related to austerity, from food prices, housing, protests because of jobs, or because of bad salaries, protests because of pension reforms, of education reforms, because of low living standards, because privatization of public services. And you can see they have been increasing solidly since 2006. And we can predict that social conflict is going to increase even more. Because these reforms, these austerity cuts and austerity reforms are being imposed, and they are causing lots of human suffering. Now, the most interesting thing is that all this human suffering is really not needed, because there are alternatives to austerity, and these alternatives can be done today as we are speaking. their financing options to avoid these austerity cuts. So instead of having very small governments and budgets, what we could do is actually look for these alternatives to austerity and financing options, and then ensure that the government budgets become big again and able to finance all public services, social security, social protection, and and all the other programs that we will want to have for more social justice. And what are these options that governments have? There are 9 options, 9. The first one will be to increase progressive tax revenues. That means avoiding regressive taxes like the ones suggested, like consumption taxes and VAT, and however, focus on taxes on corporate profits, financial activities, wealth, property, natural resources, digital services, and others. And this is not a dream. This is happening in many countries as we speak. For instance, wealth taxes been discussed in Iceland and Spain. Taxing windfall profits in the energy sector is happening in many countries, including developing countries like Algeria, Angola, Australia, Kazakhstan, Italy, Mauritania, Mozambique, Norway, Papua New Guinea, Russia, Saudi Arabia. And I'm mentioning them so you realize this is happening, and it can happen in your countries too. Taxing digital services is being discussed. Belgium, Canada, France, India, Indonesia, Kenya, Tunisia, Turkey. Financial transaction taxes were enacted in Argentina and Brazil, unfortunately taken away when conservative governments took over. However, there are new taxes added to banks' windfall profits in Hungary and Spain. Mining and gas taxes are happening, taxes to natural resource extraction are happening in many countries, and like Bolivia, Mongolia, Zambia, many. And let me give you an example. Mongolia, a very poor country, financed a universal child benefit for all Mongolian children with just a very small tax on copper exports. So, this can be done. Okay, these are all the tax options, but now we have many others. Options, as we're saying, there are 9. So the second one will be fighting illicit financial flows. These are illegal, and such as money laundering, bribery, tax evasion, and they need to be fought. And third option will be to restructure or eliminate debt, and this has happened positively in many countries too. And this is particularly important this year as the UN is discussing the Financing for Development conference. So to put these options ahead, they are very important. Fourth option for social protection alone will be to increase social security contributions of employers to adequate levels, and by formalizing workers in the informal economy, which is mostly women, and with decent contracts. So we will have there also another financing option. And then reallocating public expenditures and others that you can actually read in the publications we'll mention at the end. What it is very important is that there should not be any more decisions behind closed doors. Many of these decisions are taken at the Ministry of Finance by the staff of the Ministry of Finance with the support of the IMF, of the multilateral development banks. And this is bad. This is bad governance. It should not be that people, that these decisions that affect the lives of millions of people are done behind closed doors. They should be discussed publicly and agreed in national dialogue transparently with all important players. And so for this, actually, for all these reasons, we launched this campaign, the End Austerity campaign that Shirin was referring to. You may want to visit the website www.endausterity.org, where you have the description and many reports of members on the austerity measures, how they impact women, as well as the alternatives that we have available to all of us. And these are the specific reports. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the debate now after the presentations. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Isabel. And I here have to mention that we are also planning with Seula a regional end austerity workshop that hopefully will happen at the end of CSW. Also, MINAFEM is organizing our feminist economics and ecological school, and austerity is one of the main topics that we're going to discuss during the school in May in Rabat. That will be followed by the global feminist gathering around economical and ecological justice, where we are going to discuss together the where we are in terms of debt and austerity, how we can plan together. I saw in the Q&A, I know that we're going to have a space for this, a mention of the US new policies and the cutting on aid. We are going to discuss where are we as feminists from what is happening in this global system, and what is our alternative to a green, just feminist system. And speaking of that, we are going to release, MINAFEM is going to release our MENA debt strategy before the spring meetings, but we have very close partners that we are working to invite Daniela Berdeja from Latindad. And Daniela, I want to know more from your perspective around the drivens of austerity. And here, definitely, we are going is leading to these measures in Latin America. Thank you, Daniela. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Shireen. Thank you for the invitation. I am very happy to be here today. I will share my screen because I also have a presentation, and maybe I will ask for some extra minutes to show everything I want to show today. So I will start right now. As you, Shireen, were mentioning, yeah. First, we are facing a debt crisis, but we are seeing that it is coupled with austerity, and because it is fast here because I want to address other issues. We are seeing an increase in the public debt stock in Latin America, but as we are middle-income countries or high-income income countries, all of the countries in Latin America, we don't have practically no access to a concessional finance, so we face a huge problem with the financial tightening at the international level, and we are now paying half of the countries are paying more than 10% of their revenues to interest payments alone. If we aggregate this with the principal payments or the amortization, we see that debt service is crowding out social spending. The ratio of debt service to revenue is on average 35% in the region. If we compare this with the spending on education, health, or social protection, it is more than 2 times or 2.7 times these other important spending areas. And we see that these ratios have climbed 70% since 2022. So I think one of the key issues right now with the debt crisis is the high debt service burden that public finances are bearing. So just I will skip this. I wanted to show that when you see the variation in the public expenditure, what is pushing it to look like it is increasing is the interest payments. So if you take into consideration only the primary current expenditure without the interest payments, we see that governments are constraining their spending. So that means austerity, and I think Isabel made it so clear, and the impacts on what the measures are being taken. So I will skip that and go into what's the situation of women in Latin America. And here, this is just a snapshot because I am going to show some figures, but I know there are many other areas, dimensions that we can also address. First, during crisis, women are the first to lose their jobs and the last to regain them. We see unemployment gaps before and after the pandemic, and we see that they remain essentially unchanged. We are not advancing to closing those gaps, and beyond those gaps, we see that women are overrepresented in poverty. And here I want to stop a bit. We find that for every 100 men living in poverty, there are 123 women in the same situation. But what's important to highlight here is that this indicator has increased steadily in recent years. And even more, if you look like 15, 20 years ago, you saw that that indicator is increasing. And in Latin America, we experienced the boom commodity period between 2003 and 2014. And within those years, we had an important economic growth. But and that growth showed that the poverty was decreasing in the region. But if you see the overrepresentation of women in those stratas, we see that the overrepresentation is increasing in time. So the growth we experienced in that decade benefited maybe more, and this is an hypothesis, maybe more men than women to get out of poverty. So I think here is something more structural that we need to address. And maybe this is similar in other global south regions. On top of that, you have that 23% of women don't have their own income or live with no income of their own. So this places them in conditions of dependence on other members of the households. And if you see that they cannot find much more jobs, and in parentheses here in Latin America, we face an important problem that is informal economies. So closing my parentheses, you have that women are not finding jobs in the same level as men, and at the same time, if they find one, maybe it's in precarious condition. Then you have that they are facing some poverty. More women are facing poverty than men, and they don't have income. They may that picture put women in a more vulnerable situation and expose them to violence in some cases. So with that, I wanted to show this from the income side, but this situation is getting worse because women, as we see austerity measures and not enough public services in our countries, we see that women are getting indebted to finance education, health, and other issues. And I put here the figure of health because, this is data that we have from our Atlas of Vulnerability that was focused on the pandemic, and that's why we have this data. And as you see, it increased over time, the percentage of women that are borrowing for health purposes. And this increase is double of the increase if we compare this indicator with men. So women are overrepresented in poor households. They don't have enough income, and at the same time they are getting indebted for different issues because austerity is not allowing states to offer or guarantee enough public services for their population. And maybe you're more familiar with this, but at the same time, women are allocating much more time to unpaid work. Here you have in the green bars the weekly hours that women dedicated to unpaid work, and in the gray bars are the same indicator for men. So it's clear the gaps that you see across all countries. And just to close, if we don't address these structural inequalities for women, we are not going to achieve sustainable development, SDGs, none other indicator. If we want to end poverty, for instance, as now was saying, we are not going to achieve that if we don't address these kind of problems that we are seeing with women in poverty and with other barriers and obstacles that that we are facing. So that's why I think Beijing declaration and fulfilling that is so crucial and important in this moment. Here I want to try to mix a bit of the debt and austerity situation with the situation of women, and I ask all current paths leads to austerity, and I put current in parentheses because I hope we can change that, and not all paths leads to austerity, and we are looking here for gender justice. What I want to do here, and I don't know if I have time, but is to focus on
2 minutes.
thank you. Thank you. I think that one of the key problems that is pushing this wave of austerity across the whole world is the wrong approach of the sustainability. And I put here, I don't know if you can see these boxes in orange is there are three instruments maybe that but maybe we can include others that are centered on debt sustainability for global south countries. This is debt sustainability analysis of the IMF, fiscal rules that as Isabel was saying is not only the austerity that is pushed by IMF, but there are also other instruments in the debt management policies that governments include and are leading to austerity. And I dared here to put credit rating agencies. And why? Because I think these instruments and this whole approach is focused on the prioritization of debt repayment at all costs. First, you have to pay your debt, and after that, you can see what you can accomplish with the rest of the resources. And I think the logic should be the opposite. This prioritization of debt repayments is sometimes pushed by IMF or sometimes by our own governments because they want to show themselves as good payers to the international capital markets. And that's why they implemented these austerity measures. So prioritization of debt fits austerity, but at the same time, austerity fits prioritization of debt repayments. What I want to highlight here of these instruments, and is in the box at the left, and these approaches fails to address, and I put here 3 things, but I know there are many more, but I want to focus on these 3. The first one is the disproportionate burden of the debt cycle on women. And by debt cycle, I mean not only the repayment that we know that the heavier burden is carried by women, but also in the use of these resources, who they are benefiting. The second point is, do we have impact assessments of debt and debt sustainability on human rights, women and girls? I think we should include this in all of the analysis and models and many things that we can do when we are focusing on debt policies at national and international level. And the third one is this magical ratio of debt to GDP. And why? Because when you have high levels of debt, as the current levels we see now across all global south regions, the usual response is austerity. And I was trying to show that at the beginning of the presentation. And the second part is they say you need to grow more. It's contradictory with the austerity policies, but okay, let's focus on the GDP. What kind of growth women and girls need? Because and that's why I stop a bit when I was talking about the femininity index of poverty. it's not growth. It's not only to growth. The objective is how we grow, what model is sustaining that, and at the end, it's only a means to an end. And the end is who we want to benefit with this growth. And I think we have a lot of work to do to increase or reduce or eliminate better the structural gender gaps that we face in the regions. So this austerity, of course, is perpetuating the structural inequalities that I have shown with some figures with the situation of women in Latin America. And with this kind of approach, what we see is that at the end, women and girls are largely invisibilized. And that's why, that's what we need to change. And what we need to change this paradigm. And from our side, we think sustainability of life and gender justice should be the centerpiece of the approach. But I will try to go now beyond the sustainability and talk about some
maybe in the reflections or the comments. Very important and interesting discussions that will never end till we have our own feminist alternative applied within these global economical structures. Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you, Shireen.
Here, I mean, like your Daniela's discussions on mentioning on GDP bring me to what is our alternatives, our feminist alternatives. Is GDP the only measure? Is the only economical model that we have to use? No. It is the new liberal model, the model that was imposed on us. But there is different feminist alternatives beyond GDP. And definitely it's a discussion that needs another session, but I want to hear more on our feminist alternatives from my colleague Faith Lumunia from Akina Mama, and Faith and Akina Mama, we are working closely together on shaping our feminist perspective on the global economic structure, either on debt, tax, and others. Faith, happy that you are with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Shireen, and thank you so much to the speakers that have come before me, because I think you have made my work so much easier. I hope that my internet is stable. The last time it wasn't. But so I think for me, I like that you picked up on the GDP point, and I think we can't overemphasize the need for us to rethink it, because even when you think about a lot of what drives the austerity policies is anchored on the idea of growth and accumulation. And so the essence behind austerity policies is not necessarily welfare, like I will be sharing later, but it's really about being able to center profit maximization and drive growth. And I think for me, I want to start by acknowledging that, and this is something that has been noted already, but we know that it's about cutting spending, it's about reducing wages, it's about increasing taxes. And one of the things that is argued is that the idea behind austerity so that we can increase production by basically lowering costs. And so the arguments around the fact that because countries have gotten these loans, it might result into an increased supply of money, which could consequently result into inflation, but also because ultimately a lot of the ways in which economic policy has been structured, that it focuses, since the 1970s, there's been a significant focus on lowering inflation. So we find that, for example, our central banks, a lot of the work that goes into what they do is to try and be able to manage inflation. And so when I think for me, it's important that even when we think about austerity policies, we are thinking about their understanding of what then causes inflation. And part of their argument is that increase in wages, increase in prices of raw materials, increase in taxes, decline in productivity, and then also, like I said already, an increase in money supply is responsible for increase in inflation. And therefore, if we provided loans, if we provided this particular amount of finance, that then how do we ensure that even as we provide that financing, inflation does not occur? And I think for me, another point that I would like to make is that when you notice the pattern throughout all these aspects, you realize, and when I talk about the aspects, I'm talking about the austerity policies, so reducing wages, increasing taxes, reducing government spending, and then also the whole idea of being able to lower the cost of production, deal with inflation, etc. Ultimately, the central point is not welfare maximization. It's focusing on maximization of profits through providing quote unquote enabling environment for private sector. So you find that, for example, with reduced wages, the assumption is that then you will be able to lower population's disposable incomes, because when people have money, then they consume more, they demand more, and that in demanding more, prices will go up. And then also there are arguments around the fact that when taxes increase, and specifically their recommendation around increasing taxes is, like has already been noted, focusing on consumptive taxes and not necessarily on taxing corporates, because at the end of it all, it's not about us, the consumers, it's not about us, the people. It's about the imperialists. It's about the corporates, the profit maximizers, and one of the things I've been reflecting on is the fact that when you think about, for example, the idea of reducing government spending, allocations to things to do with social protection, social services like healthcare are largely considered as expenses within the confines of austerity policies. So they are looked at as expenses, but then when it comes to purchase of, say, a new presidential plane or increasing the size of a minister's convoy, those are considered as investments. And already you see that there is an imbalance in terms of prioritizing people's welfare needs. And I think one other really interesting thing to think about is that during COVID-19, during the pandemic, there were many economists and development analysts who were left shocked when the IMF advised developed countries to cut back on austerity. And yet at the same time, they were advising African governments, they were advising Latin American, Caribbean governments and Asian governments to implement austerity policies at a point when social services were critically needed to be able to support people, particularly given the fact that even when it came to, for example, production, when it came to employment, people's incomes had been dissipated. And so they really, really needed to have access to affordable health care. And it's not surprising, again, that during this same period, we saw that, for example, the World Bank, through their private sector arm, were heavily investing in private hospitals, and that these same hospitals were making millions in terms of profits. And a lot of them actually even held back on people's corpses, saying that they would only make them available for the families to go and give them a decent burial if they had been able to pay off the cost of health, the cost for the healthcare that had been provided. And I think for me, that's why I would like to then conclude and get into some of the feminist perspectives by underscoring the fact that austerity is an ideological tool that is being used to control how how our social services systems run. And so the ways in which this ideological tool is being used is to also ensure that our social services system remain crippled, but also to ensure that we remain in a state where we have just enough or much less disposable income available to us to be able to achieve the kind of welfare that we seek. And it's also a tool that is being used to deepen aid. And so we see that the current mess that we are currently in, for example, with the different decisions that have been taken by a number of aid countries, the US, the UK, France, etc., has placed our governments in a situation where they appear to be incompetent, appear to be inefficient, and yet it's IMF's lack of a consciousness for life, especially for the most vulnerable, that we are where we are today. So I think for me, in terms of if I'm to think about recommendations, I think it's important for us to closely align, particularly with our governments, and be able to unpack this particular issue from an ideological point of view, from a political consciousness perspective, because the economic hitman has for far too long diverted our development trajectory, and it's time that we got back to realigning it. And I think this part, this then leads me to the ideas around the reparative justice agenda. And I think for me, it's to emphasize that reparative justice can't just be about financial compensation. It should be about getting back our sovereignty. It should be about getting back, it should be about us being able to ideologically shift from what it is that we have been tuned to from the 1980s, because I mean, even there's sufficient evidence to show that in the 1960s, in the 1970s, African countries, for example, are doing really well, and that it's in the 1980s where our trajectory changed. So for us to get back into shifting that particular ideology. And the other point I wanted to make was around wealth tax, but I think that's a point that has already been made. The care agenda is another one, but that point has been made. So I'll just conclude with the point around the social contract. And I think for me, it's important that we align our discussions, for example, with the IMF and the World Bank, but particularly the IMF, and begin to question what their contribution or their influence has been in terms of breaking the social contract between our states and ourselves. And this is really about the rights and obligations to us as citizens. And we know that austerity has dissipated that. And so it's important that we demand that the IMF makes itself clear in this regard. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Faith, and that was very insightful. And yes, austerity is an ideological thing. Austerity is a political choice, not a necessity. And by this, I want to have time to open the floor for comments and discussions from the floor. أنا سأفتح باب النقاش أو الأسئلة. أرجو الكتابة إما في الشات أو في الQ&A أو رفع أيديكم حتى يتسنى لي أن أراكم. ممكن زمايلي في مينا فهم يساعدوني لو أنا مش شايفة حد رافع إيده. Please raise your hand uh, if you want to interfere, if you have a question or write in the Q&A.
There's a hand, بشرى صبرا.
Okay. Raising their hands.
بشرى go
مساء
ahead.
الخير،
Okay.
سامعيني؟ هتسمعوني؟
بشرى اتفضلي، دقيقة يا بشرى، دقيقة فقط للتدخل، اتفضلي.
حاضر. بالبداية شكرا كثير لكل المتحدثين ولكم على هاي الفرصة لطرح هذا الموضوع الكثير مهم. بدي بس أرجع المايك إذا بنفع لعند ندى. هي قالت عن كيف التفكير النيورو الليبرالي اللي موجود بالصندوق كيف عم بيأثر على حياة النساء وعم بيزيد الفقيرات أكثر فقرا. بس سؤالي هيك عم يخطر ببالي قديش عم نكون عم ينفتح مجال لفهم أو دراسة تبعيات هاي القروض قبل اتخاذها، سواء بمصر أو بأي مكان تاني، وقديش في مساحة لأنه نعرف كيف عم تنطبخ أصلا هاي الأمور حتى نقدر نوقفها ضمن الحملات أو ضمن مساعي كل وحدة فينا بتوقيف هاي السيطرة تاعت النظام الرأسمالي والجنون تاعهم بسيطرتهم على الكوكب والكواكب المحيطة.
شكرا بشرى. هل في يد أخرى مرفوعة؟ أنا آسفة مش قادرة أشوف لو زميلاتي في مينا فهم. فرح؟
لا ما فيش.
يعني يوجد بعض التعقيبات في ال Q&A معظمها خاص بساوث أفريقيا. I will read. There is some comments and questions in the Q&A from Sonny Morgan. Sonny saying in South Africa, Trump canceled USAID to South Africa. It has a real impact on the healthcare sector, but in the HIV/AIDS arena, this has very great impact for women, cutting of access to antiretroviral medication. Is there similar issues in MENA, Latin America, or rest of Africa? And other comments around the finance minister actually said that raising VAT was easiest option. He couldn't raise corporate taxes, which is only 28% in South Africa. There is unrecovery because of tax evasion and illicit financial flows, illegal alcohol and cigarettes that don't pay tax. I wonder what role of the World Bank and IMF has in advising him. We have debt to GDP ratio of 72%, set to reach 75 in the next financial years. هل يوجد أي سؤال آخر? Is there any other questions or can I move to our panelists? حسنا، سأنتقل إلى زميلاتي المتحدثات للإجابة على ما تم طرحه من أسئلة وتعقيبات. شكرا لكم جزيلا. أرجو من المتحدثات الإجابة على الأسئلة وأيضا وضع يعني recommendations الأخيرة لهذه الجلسة نظرا لضيق الوقت. سأبدأ كما بدأنا بزميلتي ندى تفضلي.
شكرا يا شيرين. خلوني أبدأ بالإجابة على سؤال بشرى. هو في شقين، يعني شكرا ان سؤالك مهم الحقيقة. هو هل ما كانش فيه دراسات محسوبة؟ لا، هو على حد علمي ان كان فيه بالفعل بعض الاقتصاديين وبعض النشطاء اللي عملوا بالفعل دراسات واتكلموا على خطورة القروض، وانه القبول بالمشروطية بالشكل اللي كانت محطوطة فيها هتؤدي الى الوضع اللي احنا شايفينه دلوقتي ان لم يكن كمان أسوأ. وافتكر كمان ان كان في مرحلة هو الوضع كان أسوأ من اللي تم توقعه يعني، وده كان تصريحات رسمية. طيب ليه ده ما تمش؟ ليه ما حدش سمعنا؟ علشان ما حدش سمع يعني. أم، أعتقد إنه كان في كمان اتجاه معين، أو خلينا نقول إنه كان قرار بإن إحنا محتاجين نخرج في دولنا المختلفة، نخرج من شكل اقتصادي معين، فالحل كان الالتجاء للصندوق والقروض بالشكل ده، حتى الاضطرار للقبول بحاجات يعني بشروط مجحفة. بس اللي احنا نقدر نعمله كمان في حاجات الصندوق نفسه بيقول ان هي موجوده، منها مثلا يعني ازاي ممكن نحاول طب نعدل، خلاص بما انه المشكله حاصله، بس نعدل بقى ده ازاي؟ في بعض الحاجات اللي نقدر نعملها، الا وهو انه مجتمع مدني مع ناس من المجتمع كمان، احنا محتاجين نبقى بنضغط على كذا نقطه. محتاجين، لا سوري مش عارفه انا عملت ايه في الكمبيوتر. احنا محتاجين نضغط على كذا نقطه، محتاجين نضغط على نقطه انه مراجعة قواعد المشروطية بشكل واضح وصريح، وإلغاء المشروطية المجحفة على الدول، وخاصة لو احنا بنتكلم على إن الاقتصاد محتاج إنه يتحرك لقدام أو كده، فبالتالي الروشتة دي محتاجة تتغير. الثلاث نقط اللي كل مرة بتتحط، هذه الروشتة لازم تتغير بشكل كبير جدا. الجزء التاني اللي محتاجين نتكلم فيه انه طب لو الروشتة محطوطة، ففوائد الديون في حد ذاتها كمان هي اشكالية كبيرة، لانه حاليا احنا مش بندفع هذا الدين، احنا كمان بندفع ما فوق الدين الفوائد بتاعتها، فبتبقى عبارة عن استمرارية للدين او للقرض. حتى لو احنا دفعنا ثمنه، فاحنا بقى اجيال واجيال بتتحمل هذه النتيجة من القرارات الاقتصادية اللي للأسف الشديد ما اتحطتش في الاعتبار الآراء الأخرى اللي بتقول احنا نقدر نعمل ايه، او نبقى عندنا ايه الشروط الأخرى، او سوري مش الشروط الحلول الأخرى، اللي منها مثلا كانت بدل من الالتجاء للصندوق، فاحنا ممكن نبقى بنعمل ضرائب تصاعدية، ممكن نبقى بنعمل استثمار اكبر داخل الاقتصاد، شركات محليه تاخد كمان البيئه وتاخد في الاعتبار العداله المناخيه والعداله البيئيه لاشخاص مختلفه. كل ده كان محطوط على الترابيزه، لكن للاسف هو ما حدش سمع. ليه ما حدش سمع؟ هو الاجابه الحقيقه عند الاشخاص اللي قررت ما تسمعش بشكل كبير يعني. ده بشكل اساسي يعني اللي في دماغي. وبس يعني هو ده اللي احنا ممكن نعمله، بالإضافة طبعا لأنه احنا محتاجين نفضل نضغط الحركة الكامبين مثلا اللي عاملينها منافم على end austerity أو توقيف كافة أشكال سياسات التقشف، ده كمان مهم جدا نفضل نضغط فيه. فطول الوقت وجودنا كمجتمع مدني، وجود الحركات الشعبية، وجود الحملات المختلفة، ده مهم إن احنا نفضل نستمر عليها. شكرا.
شكرا جدا ندى. خليني أضيف فقط على ده إنه الوضع مش قاتم يعني للدرجة دي، هو قاتم يعني مش لأنه المالتي لاترال سيستم أو نظام متعدد الأطراف في الحقيقة يهتز الآن وأصبر مات. لكن يوجد يعني مينا فهم وكان من ضمن الحملة دي العديدون من الشركاء على مستوى المنطقة ومستوى العالم. مينا فهم بتقود حملة لإنهاء تحقق مكاسب في هذه الحملة، في إنه السوري تشارجز تم تعديلها بنسبة 36%، وهو أمر اللي وفر على مصر مثلا حوالي 600 مليون دولار على الأقل من الديت سيرفيسز، وبلاد أخرى تم إعفائها، ولكن ليس كافي، وليس هو حل مؤقت if I may say. والصندوق يقدر ياخد حلول أكثر جذرية في أزمة الديون، اللي بالتالي لو تم حل أزمة الديون ستتم إزالة أو إنهاء سياسات التقشف. وهنا I want to go to my colleague Isabel to answer the questions and also to put some closing remarks. And please bear in mind the time. Isabel.
Thank you. Well, I will answer the different questions. Let me start by the issue of Trump canceling aid all over the world. Yes, it is happening in all countries where USAID had interventions. We have been hearing from colleagues all over the world, from Jordan to Latin America, that there have been huge cuts. And this includes even in countries in a conflict situation or failed state like Haiti, which is very, very worrisome. And let me continue with the issue of the corporate taxes in South Africa. And thanks for the information about that. Well, the problem is that corporates and wealthy people, they might be taxed 28% or 52%, but the fact is that they don't. The reality is that they don't even report the full income because, unfortunately, this will require, this part of the illicit financial flows, it will require actually cooperation between countries to ensure that there will be a global registry of all assets and all income of people, and then we will know, what they really have. And very often in the country, they don't report. They do have some financial instruments overseas, and this does not appear as local income. But no matter that, countries, governments do have many options. And we're saying there were 9 options, from taxation to fighting illicit financial flows, debt, anyway, of the 9 options, what a wise government will do is to try all of them and try a bit every year. So you will have a bit, better collection of taxes or better increase of taxation, just a bit, and see how it works. And then you try all the different alternatives. You can try a bit and a bit and a bit. And slowly, not all may be feasible in all countries of the 9 options, but you try a bit and a bit. And then slowly you keep expanding your budget through that. It will not be done suddenly, 1 year. It will be a progressive thing. And that will be the wisest politically too, because of course there are always winners and losers from any policy. So that will be the wisest. And last, the comment from Brusha, and I can see the desperation, what to do. Well, there are many things that can be done. By the way, the United Nations can help in that, and I understand that this is not in its best moment at the moment, but still is full of committed people. And these assessments have to be done quick. So how, certain policy, adjustment policy or austerity policy is going to impact women and people in general. So this needs to be done quickly. It does not need to be done in an extremely complicated way, because what you need is to use it for national dialogue and in a transparent way. So, and that an assessment of the options, the financing options that you have, or the alternatives. So you see, you will have this assessment that will say this has bad impacts on women and people, and for that you are looking at alternatives, and you list the alternatives, and with that you start the national dialogue rolling. Obviously, it works better. It has worked in countries with working democracies. For instance, in Iceland, it did work very well there. And there they ended even in a referendum. Citizens called for a referendum, and the government had to do it. And then they voted not to have austerity cuts. And they had up to 4 referendums saying that they did not want austerity cuts. But obviously, this is not going to work so well in authoritarian regimes, because they are not going to do that. But still, you can call for national dialogue, and eventually, if this does not happen, it may lead to peaceful protest. And that has worked in other countries too, in Latin America, Ecuador, and others. But of course, that's mobilization is more difficult. And you want to go by the more peaceful avenues of dialogue first, always. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Isabel. I'm sorry, I'm just winding the time, so I am going to move to Daniela. Daniela.
Yeah, thank you, Shireen, and thank you, my colleagues Nada and Isabel. I think they have answered most of the of the questions. I was thinking on one of the questions regarding why we are getting indebted and what can we prevent our countries. I think we should demystify that. It's not a bad thing from my view, but first we need, and this is included in the proposals and the alternatives to austerity that Isabel showed. First, we have to work on our tax systems. We can collect our own resources, and then we can have a better domestic resource mobilization. I think that's the key part. But we can also get some loans to improve conditions of people, to invest in care systems, many things. But the question is, what do we borrow for, how we borrow, and what are the conditions of those loans? So when we say what do we borrow for, we need transparency and accountability. We are borrowing for this project, for these things. How do we borrow? Is people aware of this? Completely aware? I think there is an important role of the parliaments here in our countries, and of course civil society. And the third thing is what are the conditions? And that's why we are asking for a reform of the financial system, because we are now facing higher and higher interest rates. That's why we are thinking that we should go beyond this GDP criteria. We should expand access to concessional financing. It's better if it's grant-based financing, and in this case, this should be done in addition to the fulfillment of international commitments. I mean, official development assistance and climate commitments. So loss and damage reparation, many other things. So if we gather these all elements together, I think we can have a better debt management at national level, in our governments, at local level, but also at the international level. And one other key thing I want to say before closing, we need to break this idea that the return to physical capital is higher than the return to human capital. And with this, in our analysis, in the current analysis that are being done, we need to expand the scope of the period that is analyzed, and maybe go to a longer term, because the human capital investments has higher returns, but in a longer period. So with these changes that we can do right now, maybe we can find avenues to manage better the resources we have mainly in global.
Thanks a lot, Daniela, and thanks a lot for shedding the light on the international commitments, especially that related to climate and Faith. We are closing with you, Faith.
Thank you. And I think thank you again to all the panelists. I think a lot of the questions have been answered, so I'll just conclude with parting shots. I wanted to conclude by raising a concern that while we are in the process of advancing reforms around the global financial architecture, the concerns around austerity have not been prioritized. So, for example, when you look at the first draft of the FFD outcome document that was released only a few days ago, there is no mention of austerity. And so it just shows you what the world and those that are taking decisions around our global financial architecture are thinking about some of these things. So I think that it's important. I think like Nada indicated that we need to support and be part of the End Austerity campaign because it's particularly crucial at such a time like this. And it's important that we also contribute towards building a movement of movements, and particularly at such a time like this where we are seeing that there's concerns around the need for economic justice, climate justice, debt justice, gender justice, and all the different kinds of justices. I think now more than ever, it's important that we do align all our efforts. And yeah, so I think I'll close it out there. And thank you again, MENAFEM, for convening us. Thank you. Over to you, Sharon.
Thanks a lot, Faith. And I need to mention that we are also having a discussion tomorrow in another context, not the CSW, but another context to discuss our feminist approach towards the tax framework with Akina Mama and other colleagues. Please follow our pages and websites. And we still, there, our colleague Farah Galal, our Gender and Economic Justice Officer, still there at the CSW, having a session on the 14th about the well-being economy. Please follow us. Let me switch to Arabic. شكرا جميعا جزيلا لكل الحضور. وطبعا بضم صوتي لصوت زميلاتي في حول الحملة العالمية لإنهاء سياسات التقشف. مينافم تحتضن الحملة الإقليمية لإنهاء سياسات التقشف، وسنطلق راديو إنهاء سياسات التقشف أو إنهاء التقشف من منظور نسوي خلال الأيام القادمة، راديو التقشف. فتابعونا. بشكر جدا الحضور والحاضرات، زميلاتي الباناليستس والزميلات والزملاء الحضور الكرام على وجودكم معنا اليوم. الدسكشن أو النقاش لم ينتهي. النقاش سينتهي فقط بإنهاء سياسات التقشف المجحفة. البدائل النسوية موجودة ومطروحة ويمكن تطبيقها، فلنعمل على من أجل تغيير هذا النظام الاقتصادي العالمي الذي لا يرانا إلى نظام اقتصادي نسوي أخضر عادل. شكرا جزيلا. باي باي. شكرا جدا لأمل المترجمة. شكرا جدا، تعبناك. باي باي.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very